This is the time of year when many people are making donations to charities, but there are some things you'll want to know before you give to a charity, such as how your donation is going to be used.
We're joined now by Doug White, the author of the book Charity on Trial. Thank you so much for joining us in this busy holiday season.
Well, thank you for having me.
Well, we want to ask you, everybody's always in a rush to get that donation in before December 31st. Are there some common mistakes that people make this time of year with charitable donations?
Well, they do. The most common mistake is to not get your check in the mail on time. There is something we call the mailbox rule, and people ought to mail their checks before December 31. That means they have to have it postmarked by then. That means in this year, Saturday night. Otherwise, it won't be deductible this year.
What about charity fraud? What can you tell us about finding out if the charity that you're thinking of giving to is legitimate?
That's a very complicated question, and one that I think more people need to take more time with during the year. At this point, with just a few days left, it's very difficult to find out if there are any underlying issues at a charity. But I think that people ought to do more research, understand their charities better. Obviously, we're going to give from the heart. There's no question about that. But then find out if the charity is financially viable, and more important even is find out where the money is going once they get it. We had that problem with the Red Cross after 9/11. It wasn't just a program question, it was where the money was going to go once the money was given, and they told donors that it was going to go one place and it didn't. And that's why they had such an uproar. The Red Cross did change it, and then after Katrina, another problem emerged, and that was programmatic, and they had to deal with it in another way altogether. But how do you find out about that? Well, you should talk to people. You should talk to the people who run the organization, perhaps some of the trustees. You should look at the annual report and find out a little bit more than what you might just feel in your heart upon receiving a phone call or a letter.
And Doug, I would imagine most people are giving for altruistic reasons, but some folks are thinking about their tax bills, that kind of thing. Is that something you should leave to a professional when you're trying to factor that into making decisions?
I would. I see a lot of people who feel they know there's not so much to know about this. What's deductible and what's not is not that easy a situation. Sometimes people will give away hard-to-value property, such as land or a trinket or something like that, a car, for example. And the rules on what can be deducted are very complicated. I would very much recommend that an attorney be a part, or a tax advisor be a part of that decision-making process.
I had a note this morning from someone who had seen our the person we feature each morning, called the Morning Person, and that person needed some help. And their whole office had gotten together and made a contribution to that person and took it over to where he works. Can those people take this off of their taxes if anyone wants to do something like that for one individual or particular family?
No, that is a common misperception. There was actually a case a couple of weeks ago in California where a volunteer firefighter's family was in need, and people tried to and did raise money for them. They established a charity incorrectly. Basically, the problem is that individuals are not charitable organizations, and in order to take a deduction, a charity has to be established by both the IRS and the state government, and individuals don't fall into that category. It's a very nice thing. Don't not do that, of course, but that is not a deductible gift.
Well, we're glad they did it for this particular person.
Yeah.
It's great.
Sometimes just the reason you give is the only motivation you need.
That's
Right.
correct.
So.
Well, so is there anything that we should steer clear of that you want to tell us don't go there?
There are a lot of things not to go there. I feel very strongly that if you don't have a charity that's willing to talk with you about that person's or about that organization in the most frank terms, then you should probably stay away. Ask this question: how would the community you serve change if you didn't exist tomorrow? What if you went out of business tomorrow? Who would care? Now, that sounds like a very harsh question, but by the same token, it's one that would reveal the thinking process this organization has gone through in order to justify itself. And quite frankly, there are a lot of charities in the United States, and in my view, there are probably too many. Fewer charities in this country wouldn't really ruin the country. And so if we were able to hold these feet to the fire and ask people, what would happen if you went out of business, and they didn't have that answer, then don't support that organization.
That's a good idea. Doug, a lot of these answers are in your book, which is called Charity on Trial. And we suggest if anybody has any questions, this is probably a good place to go to get some answers.
Well, I've tried to put it together in a way that people would understand it. It's not a bunch of tax geeky kind of language, and it's meant for the average person, not the really rich person necessarily, but the average person who wants to support a charity based on his or her heartstrings. And by the way, the bottom line message is not so much that you should be aware or cautious of charities. You should just do more work on trying to understand what they are. They are, at bottom, ethical organizations. And while I would oftentimes say to an organization that while knowledge without goodness is a very dangerous thing. We need to have both sides of our brain and our heart working together, and I think charities allow us to do that in a way that no other organization or no other transaction really permits us to do.
Good advice.
Yeah.